tell you some of the things that were being funded during the Nixon administration, which had been funded under Don Rumsfeld. Sadly, Rumsfeld, even though I disagree with his policies, remains a personal friend of mine. I remember when I took the job, Dick Cheney, who had been Rumsfeld's assistant, said to me, "Howard, boy, we're sure glad you're going to be doing this, because you'll do things that we wouldn't dare do." I said, "Dick, you are exactly right." And I became a very controversial figure in the nation's capital. I was scorned, ridiculed, and denounced on the front page of the Washington Post and on the interior pages, sometimes in as many as 5 different columns every day. And in all that I did, I was assured that President Nixon would veto further funding for the agency. Unfortunately, he turned tail on me, didn't do it, and so I resigned, effective immediately at midnight on the last day of the fiscal year, saying I didn't come here to be the best director of this agency. I came here to be the last director. And other things happened after I was unemployable, of course, and I survived on a $100 a week column that I wrote for Human Events. God bless my wife. Through most of our life, we have not had money, and she's never complained. She's really been wonderful. We've been married since 1964. We have 6 children. We have 16 grandchildren. And after about a year reflecting on what I had seen with my own eyes, a candidate who had opposed forced busing, quotas, etc., wound up embracing, endorsing, and advancing all of those things. I left the Republican Party in 1974, became an independent. In 1978, here in my beloved Massachusetts, and I do love Massachusetts and I miss it very much, I became a candidate for the U.S. Senate as a Democrat, running against Paul Tsongas. And why did I run as a Democrat? It was to show how irrelevant party labels had become, and that it was principles that counted, policies that counted, not party label. Well, as the history books will record, I did not prevail in that contest. I continued to work through the Conservative Caucus, which I had organized in 1974. And in the caucus, we have fought every major public policy issue and battle of the last 34 years since our organization was founded. We led the fight against the Panama Canal treaties, which, and by the way, I ran rallies in all 50 states. I intended to personally organize them. I had meetings in all 435 U.S. congressional districts. And lest you be deceived, please know that the chairman of Fred Thompson's campaign is the man who was largely responsible for the surrender of the canal, Howard Baker. And I can tell you things about each of the Republicans, with the exception of Ron Paul, and to some degree Duncan Hunter and Tom Tancredo. Most of the people competing for the Republican nomination are not with us on the things that really count. Right. So in any event, we fought the canal issue, we fought socialized medicine, we opposed the communization of Central America. I took many trips down to Nicaragua and Guatemala and El Salvador and Costa Rica. We opposed the Carter-Brezhnev SALT agreement. We fought to slash taxes and spending during the Reagan years. And I can tell you all kinds of stories about interactions I had with President Reagan and battles we had with him on many issues where he had yielded to the liberal acting president, a guy by the name of Jim Baker, doing things that he said he never would do. A wonderful man, but a man, and an imperfect man, under whose leadership the national debt was significantly increased, federal spending was significantly increased, and although you heard talk of him as a tax cutter, in fact taxes went up significantly during the presidency of Ronald Reagan. So you've really got to read the fine print. I have a newsletter called the Issues and Strategy Bulletin that covers a great many of these things. I've been at many Republican National Conventions. I was there in 1980 in Detroit. I met with President Reagan one-on-one the day that he chose George Bush as his running mate. I was pushing Jesse Helms, and I was there with Jerry Falwell and a couple of others. Falwell was pushing Jack Kemp. In the late 70s, I and a fellow on my staff, Ed McAteer, organized the religious right, and I met one-on-one with dozens of Christian pastors, D. James Kennedy, Charles Stanley, Pat Robertson, Falwell, et cetera, and we helped mobilize what became the religious right, not because we wanted to impose our Christian views on others, but because we wanted to defend our faith against their assaults. And much good came from those efforts. During the 1980s, I helped implement President Reagan's outstanding strategy of helping defeat the Soviet Union by attacking Soviet influence at the periphery of power. I made 24 trips to Africa, working with anti-Soviet guerrillas in Angola and Namibia. I was actually on the battlefield with Jonas Savimbi in Angola, one of the greatest men I've ever met. Right now, my son Brad and I are helping put one of his children through school at Liberty University, a lovely girl named Rosa Savimbi. Savimbi was truly a great man. He was on the verge of defeat because Reagan's Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Chester Crocker, had cut off the president's decision to make Stinger missiles available to him to deal with the Soviet aircraft that were overcoming his supremacy on the battlefield. And I was able to persuade Bill Casey, the head of the CIA, to personally fly to South Africa and release the Stingers to Savimbi. They arrived in the nick of time. And Dr. Savimbi, who was fluent in 7 languages, just a great man, they called him the Black Napoleon, was able to prevail in that battle. Savimbi was murdered by George Bush. Well, Bush didn't pull the trigger, but what he did was turn over to the communist government of Angola, the MPLA, tracking technology that enabled them to track down Savimbi on the battlefield and to murder him. He did not run from their attack. He was shot in the belly, not in the back, but he was no less dead. Well, by the late 1880s, I became concerned that my activities were to some degree an exercise of futility, and that it was not appropriate for me to ask others to invest their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor if we had no vision of victory, if we had no strategy for winning. So I took some time off and I thought about, to use Lenin's phrase, what is to be done. And again, I went to all 50 states, as I had done on several occasions, several other battles that we had waged. We were the ones, by the way, who invented SDI as a political issue. I ran a nationwide campaign, traveling with Danny Graham, Admiral John McCain, the father of the senator, and the various other generals and so forth, to all 50 states, pushing the concept of a global ballistic missile defense. In any event, I went back to people with whom I had worked, and I said, I don't want to destroy what influence we have. I want to enhance it, but that requires burning bridges. And I reached the conclusion that we need a political party that has a vision of victory, that has a plan to restore the American Republic. Yes. And